Let's start off by crediting South Florida. They played with the appropriate level of force and competitiveness.
How do you land a $50 million endorsement, one of the richest deals ever handed to a basketball player, and still be told you don't belong on the team? This isn't just a story about a roster cut. It's a story about power, envy, and a decision so explosive that insiders say the Team USA coach nearly lost control behind closed doors. The saga surrounding Caitlin Clark is far more complicated than anyone on the outside realizes. And it all traces back to a contract that made her wealthier and more influential than the very icons who would ultimately judge her worth. The ink had barely dried on Clark's landmark deal with Gatorade when the whispers began. This wasn't a routine sponsorship. This was a reported $50 million, empire-level partnership designed to build a brand, not just sell a product. To put that into perspective, the figure eclipsed the early endorsement money of countless male stars. It was a declaration. And Gatorade wasn't simply signing an athlete. They were crowning a new face of the sport. In a single stroke, Clark leapt from college sensation to global phenomenon, a magnet for attention whose pull stretched far beyond the hardwood. She suddenly occupied a financial tier that many veterans on Team USA could never reach. This wasn't only about cash. It was about leverage. It signaled a dramatic shift in the business of basketball where a rookie, before even completing a full professional season, carried more commercial weight than the establishment itself. But that kind of rise always comes with a price. While fans celebrated, a quiet circle of decision-makers watched closely, uneasy and unconvinced. To them, her ascent wasn't progress. It was disruption. The $50 million deal wasn't just news. It was the spark that lit a fuse. And as the early excitement faded, it became clear the celebration was heading straight toward a stunning act of resistance from the very system meant to embrace her, with the entire world watching every second live. But while the world celebrated the arrival of a new superstar, the inner circle of United States women's national basketball team saw something very different. They saw a disruption. For generations, the Olympic program had operated like a fortress built on loyalty, seniority, and years of sacrifice. It was a system where respect was earned in quiet practices, in off-season tournaments, in gold medal runs that most of the public barely noticed. It was not a system built on endorsement deals or viral highlights. It was built on hierarchy. And in that hierarchy, the veterans were the gatekeepers. They had paid their dues. They had built the dynasty. And in their minds, they alone decided who was worthy to carry it forward. Then came Caitlin Clark. A rookie who didn't just arrive. She exploded into the spotlight. She wasn't slowly climbing the ladder. She was threatening to leap straight to the top without asking for permission. She was already the most talked about player in the sport before she had even finished a professional season. Her jersey sales were breaking records. Her games were selling out arenas. Her endorsement portfolio dwarfed that of players who had spent decades representing their country. And to many inside that locker room, it didn't feel like progress. It felt like disrespect. Sources close to the program described the atmosphere as tense, almost suffocating. Every camera followed Clark. Every headline centered on Clark. Every sponsorship activation revolved around Clark. For athletes who had carried the Olympic program for years in relative silence, it was a shock to the system. It created a sense that their contributions were being erased in real time. That their gold medals, their championships, their legacy, were suddenly being overshadowed by a newcomer who hadn't worn the Olympic jersey once. It wasn't just professional frustration. It was emotional. It was personal, and that tension exposed a deeper divide. The old guard believed in team-first anonymity, in the idea that the crest on the jersey mattered more than the name on the back. Clark represented a different era entirely. An era where individual brand power could rival the institution itself. Where one player's visibility could eclipse the entire roster. Where social media reach and corporate deals translated into influence that no committee could control. To some veterans, that shift felt like a threat to everything they had built. The resentment rarely surfaced publicly, but insiders insist it was always there beneath the surface. Conversations behind closed doors. Side comments in film sessions. Subtle signs of resistance to the idea of reshaping the team's identity around a single player. And as the Olympic selection process approached, that quiet resistance hardened into something more decisive. It became a line in the sand. Then came the announcement that changed everything. The official 12-player roster for the Paris Olympics was released. And Clark's name was missing. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Fans didn't just question it. They exploded over it. Sports networks broke into continuous coverage. Analysts debated the decision around the clock. Social media erupted into a firestorm of disbelief. How could the most recognizable player in the sport be left off the biggest stage? How could a generational talent be sidelined at the exact moment her popularity was peaking? The official explanations from the selection committee did little to calm the storm. They spoke about experience. About chemistry. About rewarding players who had already contributed to international success. They referenced the physical toll of a long college season. They insisted the decision was purely strategic. But to the public, it sounded rehearsed. It sounded hollow. And most of all, it sounded incomplete. High-profile commentators didn't hold back. Stephen A. Smith called it one of the most baffling decisions in modern sports, arguing that it ignored not just basketball logic, but basic business sense. The conversation quickly shifted from whether the team could still win gold to why they would choose to do it without the player who had become the face of the sport. The narrative spiraled beyond a simple roster debate. It became a referendum on the direction of women's basketball itself. Inside the organization, the pressure intensified. Because at the center of the controversy stood one person forced to defend the decision in public, Cheryl Reeve. In front of microphones, she remained composed. She emphasized team balance. She praised veteran leadership. She spoke about the unique demands of international play. Her message was consistent and controlled. But according to multiple insiders, the reality behind the scenes was far more complicated. Reports described a coach caught in an impossible position. On one side was Clark's undeniable talent and commercial impact. On the other side was a locker room filled with influential veterans who were not ready to share the spotlight. The decision, according to those reports, was not simply about who fit best on the court. It was about maintaining internal harmony. About preventing fractures in a team that had been built on unity for years. About choosing stability over disruption, even if that meant leaving behind the sport's biggest star. To critics, it looked like appeasement. Like a decision driven by politics rather than performance. Like a calculated move to protect the existing hierarchy. And as that perception spread, the controversy only grew louder, because this wasn't just about one roster choice anymore. It was about the future identity of the sport. Whether it would continue to be controlled by tradition and seniority, or whether it would evolve into something driven by star power and global reach. And in that battle, the Olympic roster became ground zero. As the official explanations began to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny, a more uncomfortable possibility started to surface. The role of human emotion. Not strategy. Not conditioning. Not scheduling conflicts. But something far more personal. Jealousy. The conversation quickly turned toward the established stars of the program, most notably Diana Taurasi, a legend whose career had defined an era. Taurasi had long been known for her fierce competitiveness and her unwillingness to roll out the red carpet for rookies. Even before the season began, she had publicly warned Clark that the professional game would be a reality check. At the time, it was framed as veteran honesty. In hindsight, it sounded more like a challenge. A signal that the old guard was not ready to hand over control. Multiple insiders suggested that several veterans were uneasy with the idea of the Olympic spotlight shifting almost entirely onto Clark. For them, this was not just another tournament. It was potentially their final Olympic appearance. The culmination of careers built over decades. And the thought of that moment being overshadowed by a newcomer's marketing machine felt unacceptable. Clark's reported $50 million partnership with Gatorade became the symbol of that divide. It represented a financial reality that few in the locker room had ever experienced. A single deal that surpassed the lifetime earnings of many decorated players. And while some saw that as progress for women's sports, others saw it as an imbalance that threatened the value of their own legacies. In that context, the roster decision began to look less like a basketball calculation and more like a power move. A message that no amount of fame or money could override the established order. That respect still had to be earned the traditional way. That the gatekeepers still held the keys, but the consequences of that decision extended far beyond the locker room. From a business perspective, the omission of Clark created shockwaves across the entire sports industry. Analysts described it as a massive missed opportunity. Because the Clark effect was not theoretical. It was measurable. Every game she played generated record-breaking ratings. Every arena she entered sold out. Every product associated with her flew off the shelves. At the collegiate level, she had already helped elevate the NCAA Women's Championship to unprecedented viewership. In the professional league, her debut delivered some of the highest television numbers in years. She had become, in every sense, a one-person growth engine for the sport. The Olympic stage represented the ultimate amplification of that impact. Global audiences. Primetime broadcasts. International sponsorships. Networks like NBC were reportedly counting on Clark to drive viewership among casual fans who might not otherwise tune in. Her presence promised to expand the audience beyond the traditional base and introduce millions of new viewers to women's basketball. By leaving her off the roster, the organization didn't just bench a player. They reduced their own reach. They limited their own exposure. They turned away a wave of potential fans at the very moment the sport was gaining momentum. Marketing experts described it as a decision that prioritized short-term comfort over long-term growth. A choice that protected egos but sacrificed opportunity. The criticism wasn't subtle. It was relentless. Commentators questioned the leadership. Sponsors questioned the strategy. Fans questioned the motives. The narrative hardened into a simple, damaging idea that the team had chosen to resist progress instead of embracing it, and yet, amid the chaos, the person at the center of it all responded in a way no one expected. Clark stayed silent. No angry statements. No public complaints. No social media outbursts. When she finally addressed the situation, her tone was calm, respectful, and focused. She congratulated the players who made the team. She expressed support for their Olympic journey. She framed the experience as motivation rather than rejection. And then she returned her attention to her professional season with the Indiana Fever. That response shifted the entire narrative. Because while critics and analysts continued to debate the decision, Clark simply kept performing. She kept drawing crowds. She kept delivering highlights. She kept demonstrating exactly why she had become the most compelling figure in the sport. Her composure made the controversy look smaller. Her professionalism made the criticism of her absence look louder. And her continued success made the decision to exclude her look increasingly questionable with each passing game. In the court of public opinion, she didn't just recover from the snub. She won, without confrontation. Without retaliation. Without saying more than necessary. She turned the moment into proof of her character as much as her talent. She showed that her influence extended beyond statistics and endorsements. That she could shape the narrative simply by the way she carried herself, and in doing so, she set the stage for a larger reckoning that the sport could no longer avoid. A reckoning about power. About visibility. About who gets to define the future of women's basketball. And whether the institutions that built the game are ready to evolve with it or risk being left behind by the very star they tried to keep out. In the end, the saga surrounding Caitlin Clark and her Olympic exclusion was never just about one name missing from a 12-player list. It became a defining moment in a much larger struggle over the identity of women's basketball itself. It was legacy versus evolution, seniority versus star power, and the quiet authority of tradition colliding with the undeniable force of global visibility. The reported $50 million partnership with Gatorade did not create this divide. It simply illuminated the tension that had been building beneath the surface for years. On one side stood a decorated generation that believed respect must be earned slowly, through sacrifice and loyalty to the system. On the other stood a once-in-a-generation talent whose reach, influence, and commercial impact threatened to rewrite that system overnight. At the center of it all was Cheryl Reeve, navigating a decision that forced her to choose between preserving locker room unity and embracing the future of the sport's growth. She chose continuity. But in doing so, she may have delayed an inevitable shift that can no longer be contained. The lingering question is no longer about whether Team USA can win in Paris. They very well might. The deeper question is what the game itself stands to lose. Did they safeguard chemistry at the cost of alienating the next generation of fans? In trying to maintain control, did they expose a fear of change at the highest level? They may still return home with gold, but they may also discover that the momentum of the sport has already moved forward without them, guided by the very player they once left behind.